Okay, hello students. Once again, welcome back to this chapter. Actually, this is chapter 7, part 7. It's not really chapter 8. This is a mistake, okay? This is the last part of this chapter. It's called summary, chapter summary. Okay, chapter 7, part 7, okay? So, let's take a look at everything we've studied in this chapter regarding router. Let's quickly take a look at that, okay? Okay, let's have our with this chapter, we've looked at the overview of the router. We've looked at the fundamental of a router. We've looked at the overview, the fundamental of a router. And we've looked at how a router can be configured, the techniques for establishing a cursor port connection within a router. We've learned this. So we've also learned the basic step for configuring the router's interface. All the basic steps for configuring the router's interface, as in the props that you need in order to configure the router interface. And these props ranges from the user execute mode that we've studied. We say router greater than, put a greater than sign in front of a router, you put it in router execute mode. And then also we move to router privilege mode. You put router, type router, you put hashtag, then you put it in there. So we're going to talk about these different prompts. So we've learned how to configure the router's interface, whether it's the Ethernet interface or the serial interface. We've learned all of this, how to enter the IP, they configure the IP addresses with the subnet mask. We've learned all of this. And then we've also learned what is here now is that we should understand the difference in the router's user and the router's privilege execute mode. We should know the difference, and we should understand the differences between the router execute mode and the router execute privilege execute mode. So these two are two different things. The router, chapter 7.3 was the router execute user execute mode. That's chapter 7 part 3 lecture. The part 4 was specifically on the router privilege execute mode. Okay, so we should know the differences that exist in all of this. Then here are the list of the router props that we've encountered in this chapter, or the things, all the props that and commands that we've learned in this chapter. The first prompt, the router props and their definition. When you say the user execute mode for router, then you have to type router. When you're writing in the command line interface of the router, you write router and then put a greater sign symbol. It will put the router on the user execute mode. Then the next mode or prompt that we normally use for this chapter is the router, the privilege execute mode. The privilege execute mode, we write router, then we put hashtag in front of the router. Once we do that, put the router in the privilege mode. Then another prompt that we use in this chapter is the configuration mode. The configuration mode. So it's a prompt we use in this chapter, configuration mode. After you put the router in the first is the user mode, and then you put the router in the privilege mode, and then the next is the configuration mode. You write router open bracket config hashtag. So once you write router, open your bracket and close it, you put config hashtag in front, then you put the router in the configuration mode. Then another prompt we use in this chapter, okay, chapter 7 part 5, we talked about the configuration mode and the interface configuration mode. So if you want to put the router, configure the interface of the router, you just need to write router config -if. That if is interface. Router config -if, then hashtag. Close the bracket and put hashtag. It means you put the router in the interface configuration mode. Okay? All these are the prompts we use in this chapter. The last but not the least prompt that we use in this chapter is the router config -line. That you want to configure the line terminal, the line terminal configuration mode. So you say router open bracket config -line, close the bracket, put hashtag. Once you do that, you've put the router in the line terminal configuration mode. So these are the prompts that we've used in this chapter, and this summarizes everything that we've done in this chapter. Okay, mind you, remember we said the first part was the overview overview of the router. The second part was the fundamental. 7.2 was the fundamental of the router, the details about the router. 7.3, we looked at the how to configure the user execute mode. How to configure the user execute mode. 7.4 was the privileged execute mode of the router. Privileged execute mode of the router. 7.5 was the configuring the network, the network interfaces. Okay. 7.6 was troubleshooting the router, and 7.7 is the summary itself that we're talking about. So with this, we've come to the end of everything about router, chapter 7. Okay. So we'll see you in chapter 8. Okay. Thank you.